Hello, and after a wee break and our election podcast, The Polling Station, the Scottish Independence podcast is now back. The guest on our first episode back is Allan Grogan, who ran the Labour for Indy group during the referendum campaign and has now joined the SSP. I asked Allan about why he decided to start the group. We also got onto what's been happening in the Labour Party since the referendum and since the election, and where they're at now. It looks like a difficult position. Finally, we got onto the prospects of Indyref 2 and the how, what and when of it. So, hope you enjoy it and I'll have a wee word with you at the end. Hi Alan, how's it going?
Good, Michael, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Busy wedding preparations and so on, but I believe you're just recently married yourself.
Yeah, we're coming up a couple of months, 2 years anniversary, so, I'm, as I said, I suffered the same bank balance affliction that you're probably going through right now. I think we've all been there, so...
Oh yes, but it'll be a wonderful day.
It will, and you'll have a fantastic day. So
if we get there, yeah. Okay, so, right, I wanted to have you on the podcast during the time of the independence referendum because you were doing something that was quite different. Most people were representing their own groups. There was many new groups, fantastic groups that started up, Women for Independence and so on. And then there were other people who were working within a party. But you were doing something else. You were working within a party, but for the opposite of what the party's stated view on the issue was. And that was quite an interesting position to be in. We'll start back then and then we'll work our way towards where we're at now. So why did you decide to start the group?
I mean, I think... it seems so long ago now. I remember it was in response almost to a debate I went to when I was at university just before the 2007 Scottish elections. And it was an independence debate, and one of the questions was talking about, what about if you're a Labour supporter and you support independence? And the Labour representative said, well, vote SNP if you want independence, don't vote for Labour. And it always struck me as odd because I had always supported Scotland's ability and right to self-determine as any other country would, and I guess I probably was coming at it from a slightly nationalist perspective on that regard, but I always felt that there was no duplicity in between being a Labour supporter and also wanting independence. I saw these two things as, it wasn't something that you could bounce off and say that, they're not compatible, because I think there was no direction or avenue in which you couldn't be a Labour supporter and also support independence. And I think as it came to pass, and when the SNP won their majority in 2011, that we began to see what was formulating about the referendum happening, and the fact that the Labour leadership just came out and said, no, we are not going to be supporting independence, we're going to be against it, and the membership should also be against it. And I felt that was, betraying of what the democratic principles of what the Labour Party was always about. And the fact that we never got that vote at conference, we never got that say, because the Labour Party's never been defined as a unionist party. It's not the Conservative and Unionist Party. It's very similar to where the Greens were. And the Greens, there was a certain number of support who were against independence, but they did have a vote at conference and they passed, and that's why they were in support of independence. And I think the Labour Party should have done that. And if they had have done that at the time, it would have been very strongly that the No campaign in the Labour Party would have won. But that gave supporters of independence like me an avenue, and it originally started as a Facebook page. I'd been a member of the Labour Party, an activist at elections, but wasn't heavily involved in executive decisions or anything, even at branch level. And it was an avenue for just to basically see if I was the only one or if there were other Labour people. And, I think what showed within the space of the 2 years was that there was a real appetite. And I think as we moved on, my perception of what independence really was really grew along with the campaign, because it wasn't just that Scotland should have an equal right just like any other nation should, that it would actually benefit Scotland as a society and how it could improve the lives of many people in Scotland, how I feel we're different to certain parts of the United Kingdom, particularly in London and south of England, in the way we treat our priorities. We don't treat the economy or immigration as key priorities. We value education and health and welfare and pensions and looking after people a little bit more here. And I think what independence gave us was a real opportunity to radically change the fabric of our society to make it fairer and more equal, which was based along the lines of what the Labour Party was created for, over 100 years ago. And that's why the Labour Party was formed. And the more we talked to people and spoke at campaigns and spoke at meetings and out on the streets, more people were saying, the real Labour Party, the old Labour Party, traditional Labour Party, we defined it as the real Labour Party. There was a real appetite in Scotland to have that Labour Party back. And it was
Mm-hmm.
clear that the only way that was ever going to happen would be through an independent Scotland, because with London Labour controlling and dictating, as we've seen, it's almost like an unfortunate we told you so, but it's coming home to roost. The London Labour or British Labour is in control of Scotland and the Scottish Labour Party, that so much that it can't change.
When did this unionist element to it take over? Because if you go back in the history of the Labour Party, there was a kind of strong commitment to more home rule or even independence. If you think about in the Labour movement, people like John Maclean and so on, there was a strong tradition of home rule or even outright support for independence within that Labour Party. When did this kind of unionist element take over?
I think it's difficult. I mean, I think it's probably at the same time that the Labour Party itself moved from where it was. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There was actually friction between, John Maclean in that regard, who were in support of full independence, and people like Keir Hardie, who were supporters of home rule. And John Maclean obviously didn't feel that the Labour Party went far enough in that regards. And I think as things evolved, and obviously you have to look at the cultural significance of things like world wars. World War II obviously brought a huge unification of what it meant to be British and Winston Churchill. And I think we had to, what we perhaps didn't do so well in the independence campaign was acknowledge that this happened, and that, we have been partners and we have been friends and we would continue to be so. But these are all these great things that have happened in part of the United Kingdom, which the Labour Party were projecting, and the Conservatives that were projecting why we should stay together, were actually things that, the last thing I think that David Cameron mentioned was the National Health Service that happened, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. So, I mean, we had to project that better. And I think Labour got lost along the way in where it defined itself as, particularly in Scotland, as whether it was standing for home rule, whether it stood for devolution. I think a lot of it came in 79 when people like Jack Cunningham instigated that 40% rule. And I think we were at odds with each other, and there were people who were fiercely unionist who perhaps had more of an edge within the party. And I think we lost our way similar, and it's probably about the same time that we lost our way towards where we should be as a party when Neil Kinnock came in, and obviously Tony Blair following on from the work that Kinnock did and moving it towards the centre and centre-right as well.
But then you mentioned earlier that you started to get a lot of real support from within the party. We'll come back to that, but you also started to get a lot of accusations flying around very quickly. Anyone who turns on Twitter will have seen these reasonably quickly. So, were you an SNP front? Just in case our listeners don't know, you've actually joined the SSP now. So, are you now an SNP front in the SSP, or were you at one point an SNP front within the Labour Party?
It turns out the newspapers in Gordon Brewer and that got it all wrong. We weren't an SNP front, we were an SSP front. They just got it wrong. We just got one letter wrong. No, I mean, where that started, where that came from, was that we were very keen to be working with other yes groups. We felt that the dialectics between political parties, particularly in Scotland between the SNP and the Labour Party, were so opposed to each other, when in actual fact, in societal issues, the SNP were actually moving towards where the Labour Party should be, and once were. And I think that during that time, the Labour Party just became at odds with saying no, just purely because it was an SNP idea. I think I said that Alex Salmond could ruin Joanne Lamont's leadership by just turning around and saying, Joanne Lamont's a fabulous leader, isn't she? And because the SNP said it, all of Labour would turn around and say no. And it was just that perception of it. And I think what happened was we were talking about, working within other parties, the Green Party, the SSP, the SNP obviously was a major part in Yes Scotland, and all these groups you've mentioned previously. We were getting involved, and I think we were trying, certain people who were perhaps new to campaigning were trying to show our solidarity with these parties, and one of the pictures that they took, they thought it was in Edinburgh, would be a good idea for the SNP members of the Yes Scotland group to hold the Labour for Independence banner, and the Labour for Independence members who were at the stall to hold the Yes Scotland banner, not for once thinking that there would perhaps be a disingenuous former News of the World hack who might have photoshopping skills on his laptop. And that's really where the story came from. It came from Ewan McCollum, who's a former News of the World journalist, and I think that defines Ewan McCollum pretty well, that these pictures were edited and they were produced en masse by the British media to project that we were part of the SNP and the Labour Party. I spoke to people in major newspapers, major right-wing newspapers, and talked to them about the issue before they printed it. And they admitted to me it wasn't a story. And I said, well, why are you printing it? And they said, well, because the Labour Party sent a press release, so we have to respond to it. And that's, I think that's where Labour for Independence stuck. But what was great about that was actually we had been, ploughing along, going to meetings, building up our membership, building up our support levels. Our membership and our support levels quadrupled overnight when Ewan McCall came out. All of a sudden, these Labour supporters who had never heard of Labour for Independence suddenly saw and went on the website and checked our press release, and which was refuted, obviously, the allegations. Our membership, I wasn't looking at the membership, but we were told it quadrupled overnight, and that just showed the huge progression. So I think I spoke to Ewan McCall a little while afterwards, and he said he was going to start digging around about Labour for Independence again. I said, please do. We can always do with increased membership before the referendum starts.
And it was noticeable that as the referendum got nearer, it was much more active. There was much more stuff coming out from Labour for Indy. So when the referendum came round, how many, I don't know if you have the figure to hand, but how many Labour voters as a percentage actually voted for independence, actually voted yes?
Well, we were told that the last time I heard the projector of members, because we had a membership in which you could be a member of the Labour Party or a supporter of the Labour Party, but you could not be a member of any other political party in order to be a member of Labour for Independence. And I think it was about 15,000, which at the time was probably about half, probably decent about the size of the Green Party, I would imagine, which is obviously in Scotland, which has expanded since then. I do know that when we began the campaign, when we launched Labour for Independence, that summer when we started to pick up traction in the press, we first appeared in the Herald and Newsnight. And it was the first march and rally event in Edinburgh, and I think the Labour vote was at 9%. By the end of the vote in 2014, the referendum night, it was 39%. Now, I don't think that was all Labour for Independence. I think there was organisations like the SSP, parties like the SSP and organisations like Radical Independence, who were also going into working class areas, who were going into these real Labour areas and saying this is not about the SNP. But I think the Labour for Independence played a prominent role in that, and it's a shame for all the people who joined and contributed, because as you said, you saw in the last, probably from the January, we really picked up steam and started to get big endorsements from former Labour people. Bob Thompson was the former chairman of the Scottish Labour Party, Les Huckfield, who was a former minister in Callaghan's government. These people were starting to endorse Labour for Independence and what we were standing for, and really gaining momentum. And it's unfortunate that because we kind of ended as soon as the referendum was finished, that history probably looks back on our contribution. Certainly reading people like Ian McWhirter's books, it's almost as if Labour for Independence didn't exist, which is it's a sad thing, because I think we did play an important part in that. If not for anything else, but to turn around and say, this is not a vote about Alex Salmond or the SNP, it's a vote for you, it's a vote for your future, and it's a vote for changing the kind of society that we want to live in.
Moving on beyond the referendum then. So obviously the group disbanded shortly after, but did you resign from the Labour Party immediately, or did you have a little bit of soul searching first, or whatever? I don't know. How did it work? Or was it when your best mate Jim Murphy came in? I don't know. What was the?
No, Jim Murphy was. I left. I joined the SSP, and then it was announced on the Tuesday before the SSP conference, and on the Friday before the SSP conference, Joanna Lamont resigned. So obviously she was devastated by the news that there was no coming back for me to the Labour Party. But no, I think I'm honestly trying to remember. I remember the first day, the Friday, I had to go to work and I'd slept 2 hours and just being so emotional about it all, and as so many people were. And I think that whole weekend it was just kind of a stupor. We just didn't know where to go.
What do we do now?
What are you doing? Yeah, what do you do now? And I could understand why so many people were joining political parties, because they were looking for something. Because yes, Scotland were sort of similar. That yes, Scotland kind of just vanished. It was almost like they didn't